Hi, so good evening, everyone. Welcome to another happy webinar. Here we all are. And this evening, we've got Patrick Hill, Dr. Hill, who is a clinical psychologist specializing in pain. And I've sent you the blurb about him. So rather than me rambling on, I'll hand you over straight away to Patrick to explain his ideas and what he's going to talk about.
Thank you. Thanks, Maureen. And yes, thank you very much for asking me or offering me the opportunity to do this. This was sparked really by seeing the advert for the summer retreat, um, and the heading of the title of it being on women and pain.
Yeah.
And I was sort of keen to come, but I can't come because we're um, uh, flying back from the States the same weekend, which is um, a shame. But anyway, it's an issue that I sort of really wanted to talk about, and so Maureen offered me the opportunity to do this today instead, which is lovely. So I'm very pleased to be able to do this. Um, yeah, some of you I know, and some of you I don't. As Maureen said, a clinical psychologist. I'm kind of retired now, but only recently. And I've worked in and around long-term conditions, but particularly chronic pain and fatigue for over 30 years now, and that's sort of that's where I'm coming from. So I'm going to share some slides. We're aiming for about half an hour, Maureen. Is that right?
Yeah,
To
about that. Yeah. I mean, could give you 35 because we're
give,
starting a bit
give
late.
you,
So,
yeah, okay. No, that's kind of what I'm aiming for.
yeah.
So let me just see if I can get this up. Can you see that?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So that's the title. Is chronic pain telling us something important about society? Now I'm going to confess that I'm operating two computers um, here, one with my notes on and one showing you the slides. So I will try my very hardest to keep it coordinated, but wave at me if I'm rambling on and the slide hasn't changed because coordination is not my strongest point.
Don't worry.
Um, okay, so let's get going. So, what I really wanted to um, call this talk was um, pain is a feminist issue, but I kind of didn't feel qualified to do that, and I hummed and hawed about it for ages. Anyway, my wife said, "No, you should call it that because that's kind of really sums up what the issue is about," and that's what I'm going to try and unpack for you this evening. Um, it, there's some very basic facts, which is that we have known for a long time, but recent UK survey showed very clearly, and it's represented in other countries across the world, that many more women and girls than men and boys present with chronic pain. Um, we kind of also know, and I would say this because I'm a psychologist, I know, but we kind of also know that some fairly key determinants of chronic pain and fatigue are psychosocial alongside the biological. Um, and so we're going to talk about that. And we also know that women are unfairly disadvantaged by society. So what I'm going to try and do is knit these things together into a coherent story for you. So um, uh, as I say, we've known for a long time and if you look at all sorts of different reports, that most of them say that or suggest that 70% of people presenting with chronic pain are women. I always thought that was a bit of an underestimate, actually, because I've run pain management support programs, similar things for years, and in all the group work we've ever done, it's the proportion's been higher than 70%. And I just picked this paper at random. It happens to be by some colleagues, but it was a random thing out of the literature. Just have a look. So this was published 2023, and in their sample, they 200 people who'd been through a group program. It was 88% women, 12% men. That's for me. That's more fits more with my experience. So high numbers of women presenting. There's probably all sorts of complications as to why it kind of goes up by the time you get into that kind of situation. Um, but nevertheless, it just reinforces the point, doesn't it, really? So, big survey in 2021 as part of the government strategy to look at women's health. They looked at 110,000 women. Um, these are some of the highlights that 50% of respondents felt that their pain was disregarded or overlooked. They reported that certain symptoms, particularly related to menstrual health, were to be expected and accepted as a natural part of being a woman and thus did not deserve medical attention. Seems unbelievable in this day and age, doesn't it? But there we go. Oh, this is the worst bit. In the same survey, women were still reporting that they had pain for years and years and been repeatedly told it was all in their head. So I was looking at this 30 years ago, the same issues, and thinking we've got to do something about this. And I'm not sure what I've done with my career really, but I haven't changed this. So anyway, it's still out there. There was a editorial, a special edition of the Lancet, and in the editorial March 2024, where they're looking at gendered pain, their conclusion was that, it's unmistakable. Women enduring delays in diagnosis, inadequate pain management, disparities in access to treatment, and so on, across the world. So this was UK, Australia, America. Even in the short editorial, they were quoting these different parts of the world. Um, so, we know that's all out there. Again, this is no big surprise to many people, of course. But I started to think about the sort of vicious circle element, or vicious circles that are likely to arise from this because they seem to be a really important part of long-term pain, living with it, managing it. And one just jumped out straight away, which was that if we start at the top of the circle, um, we know from the survey now that pain is disregarded, overlooked, undertreated. What's that likely to tell people? Well, particularly if they've been told it's all in their head, maybe it's likely to breed a sort of thought or belief that, well, I'm expected to just cope with this. Um, we know that's likely to increase people's vulnerability to chronic pain, and I'll unpack that for you a bit later on. But essentially, we're then getting higher numbers of people presenting with chronic pain. What's it going to do to a number of health professionals? But just reinforce it's all psychological, it's all in your head, and round we go. So, um, again, maybe it's not a big surprise, but it's a problem that's getting worse. We know it's getting worse as more and more people are presenting with conditions like primary chronic pain, secondary chronic pain, fibromyalgia, and so on. So these are some of the sort of, just the sort of starting points, really. And my plan is to look at it in this way. I want to just have a very quick look at what is pain, why is it created. I know many of you know this stuff, but I just want to make sure we're on the same page. So I'm not going to spend ages on that at all. I'm just going to show you what I think. Talk a bit more about women in pain. I want to introduce you to a thing called the Power Threat Meaning Framework, which is a new tool for psychologists, which I think is really helpful. Show you a model that I think maps onto that, and then introduce you to my model where we start to talk about a mechanism for how actually all this pulls together, because I think that's one of the things that's sort of been absent really, and I've had a go at trying to produce a model that shows how this might all link together, and then we'll finish up looking at social context. So this is stuff hopefully that most of you know. IAPT updated their 40-year-old definition of pain and they added in the red words. So they added in resembling that. Now, for me, that was important because it really sort of opened up a little bit further on the sort of psychosocial element, if you like, which is already in there. But it sort of opened it up even further. What was more important, I thought, were the notes that came with it. So they said, well, okay, so we agree it's always a personal experience. Very clearly that pain and nociception are different phenomena. And you cannot assume pain from looking at what's going on in the nerves alone. the important concept of learning, um, that people learn the concept of pain over time, that people's report of pain should be respected because it's their pain, it's a personal thing. Um, and then probably the most important bit, which is pain is usually an adaptive response to threat. And one of the things I want to sort of talk about is the fact that we've always talked about chronic pain as being useless pain. We very often talk about acute pain being useful pain and chronic pain being useless or unhelpful pain. And I don't really believe that. I think it's telling us something different. So I think acute pain is telling us one thing, chronic pain is telling us something else. I think it's all an adaptive response to threat, but it's just a different thing when you get to chronic pain. Again, we'll unpack a bit more of that as we go through. So we've got the IAP definition, a biopsychosocial frame, if you like. This was the next thing I wanted to put in front of everybody, that this is where I'm coming from. I hope everyone else is too. I think generally it's agreed now that pain is created by a top-down process rather than a bottom-up process. So the CNS, the brain and spinal cord are key to the kind of pain, how much pain people get. It's really not about just what's going on in the periphery, although that might be the initial trigger. Now my colours to the mast. When we start to look at the complexities of what's involved in the process of creating pain, um, I just kind of put a whole load of things up there, and the font might even be slightly too small to see there. But and it's not exhaustive, but it's just covered all the kinds of things that I've had to deal with people over the years that will be very familiar to many of you. We've got sleep, self-care, relaxation, stamina, self-esteem, knowledge, relationship, security, status, employment, sense of control, and so on. But there's just a massive amount of stuff. Again, I'm not going to dwell on this because I know you know it. Okay, so that's the pain stuff. Now the psychology stuff. So again, just to make a clear point, psychologists are essentially interested in human behavior, why people do things. Clinical psychologists tend to be interested in abnormal behavior, but essentially we're interested in all human behavior. Um, and clinical psychologists like myself use a different approach than our medical colleagues. So we don't actually diagnose, although occasionally we might use a medical diagnosis. We use this process called formulation, which is really about pulling a story together about what is going on, and putting in together many different elements. Again, many of you will have heard of this term before, but formulation is very much what we do. Um, and so the kind of questions that we tend to be interested in as psychologists are not so much what's wrong with you, but more what happened to you to create what's in front of us. Um, and this is where this new framework, the power, threat, meaning framework, comes in. This was a thing that was supported by our society, the British Psychological Society, and Lucy Johnson and her colleagues published it in 2018 now. And it's really a framework that helps the profession to lean more towards formulation rather than diagnosis, because there's a lot of other pressures that have pushed us in the other direction. The success of IAPT, although it's been great, unfortunately tended to push the profession more towards a diagnostic approach. And we felt there was the need for some redress of the balance. And this is what attempts to do. Let me explain what it is. So the power threat meaning framework takes account of context. It sees emotional distress and behavior, in other words, what's being presented to us, as probably an understandable response to history and circumstances. In other words, what we're seeing with people's anxiety or various things is that there's probably a reason why it's there. It was probably an adaptive thing at some point in the past, and we just need to understand what it was that got someone there. It centers on the fact that many people in distress have experienced an abuse of power in their lives. and power is defined in lots of different ways within the framework. Um, uh, these are the questions that the framework asks. Um, Again, similar to what I've said already. So we tend to ask people using this framework, we tend to ask people what's happened to you? What's been your experience? How has power been abused, or have you had that experience of abuse of power? How did it affect you? What kind of threat did it pose? Threat's a very important concept in terms of pain. What sense did you make of it? What did it mean to you? And what did you have to do to survive? What was the adaptation that you had to make? Um, so these are the kind of questions we ask using this framework. And I find it really helpful because a model that I've been working with for some years uh, is this one on the right. Sorry, this is a bit complicated, this slide, but this is a model that was developed by Christina Sarawi and her colleagues in 1995, based on close observation and interviews of people with chronic fatigue syndrome. And what they found was that there were some pretty consistent behaviors amongst this group of people, and some fairly consistent beliefs. And what they started to come up with was the idea of uh, some premorbid traits and tendencies, which created a vulnerability to people, so that when there was a triggering something, that some people were more vulnerable to chronic fatigue. Um, and it maps very, I'm not going to go into this because we haven't got time, but it maps very nicely onto the power threat meaning framework in terms of exploring this. Um, Other work, I'll just mention this, other work that followed on, there's been a whole series of studies that have looked at whether the model um, uh, can predict the transition from acute to chronic across a range of conditions. They've looked at irritable bowel syndrome, post-concussion syndrome, chronic fatigue, um, and various other. Those are just the big ones that they've done, and found that the ideas in this model are very predictive of a transition from an acute to a chronic stage. So I got really interested in this in terms of its application to chronic pain, or the transition perhaps from acute to chronic pain. And uh, it kind of boils down to this really. So when you look at uh, most chronic populations, say particularly the ones that have been studied, they found these behaviors you can see on the left. So this all or nothing behavior in bold there is the sort of a key one. It's one that's uh, seems to be really consistent. So people are kind of constantly striving for high standards. There's a degree of perfectionism, if you can call it that. Not admitting to any weakness, not sort of talking about how you feel, neglecting own needs and concentrating on others and bottling up their feelings. From the interviews that they did way back in 95, and again, these have been pretty consistent when they've looked at other populations since, they found these kind of thoughts. I must achieve high standards. I must be in control of my emotions, um, and so on. As you can see, they're quite pressurizing, imperative thoughts, and a range of understandable feelings. So that's what the model means in practice. That's the kind of thing that you see in terms of the behaviors, thoughts and beliefs and feelings that are around. So I hope that's kind of making a little bit of sense. Um, so kind of what we've got, if you like, is the idea of pain as a biopsychosocial phenomenon. The idea that these psychological elements are important, and that for various reasons, people will develop these kind of behavioral and cognitive tendencies, and that puts them at risk of uh, chronic pain. Um, the bit that was missing in the middle was I thought, well, how does it tie together? What's the sort of mechanism? And this is the bit I wanted to share with you as well. Um, and it came from listening to people like Lorimer Moseley and Irene Tracy, and them talking about the fact that or the idea they thought that um, chronic pain might be more to do with a reduction in what they call descending inhibition rather than an increase in something coming up the system. It was more about maybe a lack of um, uh, modulation or descending inhibition from the higher brain centers. Um, and I really that really appealed to me as an idea, and that's what this is kind of based on. I'll explain what I mean as we go through. So the key elements of the model is that, as we've kind of said already, the central nervous system, we know, and I think most people are agreed, is evolved to detect and manage threat. It produces pain as a way of signaling that there's a threat. But one of the things about it is that that system is always on. So there's a constant stream of data coming up from the body, telling the brain and spinal cord what's going on. We think, or I think, that descending inhibition from the higher brain kind of modulates that input. So if we think about there's a constant stream of messages coming up, possibly danger, possibly not, but there's a constant stream coming up. That's kind of modulated from higher up by uh, the brain fact checking about what's going on and essentially kind of keeping the thing under control until it thinks there's a problem, in which case then it will start to generate pain. Um, my argument is that this inhibition is reduced in acute conditions, which you want it to, so that pain and fatigue is projected into consciousness, enforces rest while the body can heal and get on with things, um, and then goes away as the body heals. My argument is that vulnerable systems, people who have vulnerable systems, have kind of less to draw on to make this happen, and that chronic pain results from the system falling into dysregulation. And I got some pictures to sort of show you what I mean. So let me do this because it might make it clearer. So the idea is, and this is just a representation. Who knows what's in there, but I thought a switch would illustrate the point nicely. So you've got this idea of where it says potential threat of data coming up from the body. You've got modulation from a number of systems all over the brain that are keeping the idea of threat in check. And while it does that, the switch stays open. No protective action. What I mean by that is pain, fatigue, or other things, because sometimes other things happen as well, which might come under the title of protective action. We can talk about that later. But that's the idea. There's the switch. Now, in terms of what's involved, again, I've put some of the things in that we know are important. We know that sleep's important. We know that stress and relaxation is important. We know that a perceived sense of control is important. So this is not a random collection of things. This is stuff that we know is involved in pain one way or another. The idea is that in a normal system, if you like, that people have a load of these things which help with the modulation process. When people have an acute injury, so say you sprain your ankle, just for argument's sake, so the potential threat comes in. Um, uh, Clearly, some things will be immediately affected. It's more difficult to relax. Um, Sleep's probably disturbed and so on. And so what you start to see is the system swinging in that direction, and the red arrow suggests that the switch is closing and that pain is more likely to be produced, which is what you want in that situation, so that the person will rest and allow the healing to take place. And then as healing takes place, the idea being that as those things are restored, the switch opens up again, the pain goes away. So that's the kind of normal process. If we start to look at uh, the people who are vulnerable, we know that, as we've been talking about, and again, you'll know this from other experience as well, people who have poor self-esteem, disrupted sleep, are not good at pacing themselves or looking after themselves, maybe a lowered sense of control, are vulnerable. If we look at this in this context, if we take those things away, it means the system is already swinging in the wrong direction. So it's kind of vulnerable. That's the idea here. Um, so if we then introduce another threat like a virus or anything really, a sort of health threat of some kind, um, so I'll go back. Within a short space of time, we know that things like fitness, stamina, your ability to get out and achieve because you can't go to work, they disappear. So the idea being that, actually the system gets more vulnerable, um, uh, just really from maybe something normal that's happened, just like again, like a sprained ankle or a virus. Um, but if it carries on, in other words, if the person involved here perhaps is not very good at self-care, at resting, perhaps they can't because they've got pressures on them. Um, it means that actually things like employment, um, uh, relationship breakdown, employment's maybe threatened, social support maybe start falling away. And so the system can start to tip into dysregulation. And of course, then you get a buildup of things um, that actually increase threat. So this is the sort of psychosocial elements on top of the physical stuff. Um, and it becomes really difficult for the system to reset. So that's kind of the idea, if that makes sense. That's the model. So nearly finished now. So a couple of minutes. So that's the model of, I think, how or a mechanism, which kind of makes sense to me, as to how this stuff ties together. But I wanted to come back to social context because the title of the talk was, is uh, society telling us the problem. Well, what are these bigger social issues? We haven't really looked at them yet. Well, there's plenty of them. So, you know, as we know, women and girls more likely to experience chronic pain conditions compared to men and boys. Often report more pain, greater functional impairment. So we've kind of said that. Why is this surprising? So Oxfam, this is this week, just looked up the Oxfam website. So across the world, we've got these what we might call structural disadvantages. Um, Again, no big surprise, I'm sure, to many of you. Um, that's the big picture. Um, a very new study, this has just come out in the last couple of weeks. In the States, they've looked at, it's actually quite interesting as well as quite horrifying. Um, they looked at the most sexist states in terms of their policies and representation in the United States. And they compared the most sexist states with the least sexist states. I put them in, so the most sexist states, according to their criteria, were Alabama and Mississippi. The least was Connecticut. They found that women in the most sexist states had 9 years more cognitive aging than in the least sexist states. Um, and surprise, 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 the negative impact on memory performance is stronger among black women than it was among white women. So it shows you very clearly that not just deprivation, but sexism, in the um, uh, social culture, if you like, was actually seemed to be having an effect on dementia in women. Um, so that's a bit sobering, isn't it? And then the final thing I wanted to show you, many of you will have seen this. We actually watched this show and sort of didn't quite take it on board at the time, but then sort of became aware of this happening. Um, the fact that on social media, sorry, I mean, um, uh, Saoirse Ronan's response to the boys on the Graham Norton show talking about being taught unarmed combat, as it were, in the course of um, training for various films. And she was just looking sort of speechless and said, the boys are talking about being taught to use a phone as a weapon, and it was something that hadn't occurred to them before. And she said, girls have to think about this all the time. Um, so is it any wonder, really, that women are more vulnerable? There's a whole lot of stress that I've flagged up, um, which, in terms of my logic, is going to make them more vulnerable to chronic pain. So is it surprising, really, when we look at it? Um, and then the final slide. Um, uh, lots of people are talking about Gabor Mate, and I just thought he was worth a mention because he's kind of saying the same thing, really, that chronic conditions, autoimmune conditions, are really an expression of trauma. So he sort of pushes on it a bit further. But when I looked to what he was saying, we're saying the same thing, and that's it.
Great,
So
thank
I'll
you. Yeah, really
stop.
interesting. Very interesting indeed. Thank you so much, Patrick. So, anybody want to put up their hand in the react button, or can I ask a question to set the thing going?
Yeah, do.
Um, I mean, one of the things that I was wondering was, are women more likely to ask for help when they have pain than men? So it may be that they actually suffer more pain, or maybe they're more likely to admit to it. Like men won't ask for directions, they can't read the map, they
Mm,
rather keep
mm.
going. So I don't know whether there's a
Well,
cultural bias against men
well,
asking.
yeah. I mean, I think there's probably a vicious circle thing going on there because yes, that is another factor that women do ask for help um, for health issues more generally than men. But you saw the response in the survey, you know, that
Yeah,
women were saying that you know, particularly for sort of women's health issues, they were being dismissed. So they were asking for more help, but being dismissed. And the point I was sort of making at the beginning, I suppose, was just that I can see that knot in the vicious circle getting tighter and tighter because actually, if women are asking for help, being told, "Oh no, you know, that's just part of being a woman, go away," which is kind of what they were saying, that's likely to tip them into the kind of behaviors and concepts we were talking about in terms of then thinking, right, okay, well, I've got to shut up about this and just, you know, keep quiet and carry on. That's likely to tip them into chronic pain. So what's likely to happen over time is that they're going to represent either with episodes of acute pain, and we've seen this actually, I'll talk a bit about this in a minute. We've seen this happening, or they'll present with chronic pain, which unfortunately just reinforces the kind of unhelpful stuff.
yeah,
So yeah, I think that's part of it. I agree. Um,
sure. It's
I mean, we
complex.
can I just mention something because it's just triggered a
Oh
memory.
yeah.
So I did a bit of work uh, in Bath a few years ago now, where we looked at the frequent attenders in the A&E. That was what we were commissioned to look at. And what we found was that in the vast majority, so it was like 90% of the people who were attending A&E were attending with abdominal pain, and they were young women, sort of between the ages of about 18 and 35. Um, and what sort of there's all sorts of interesting things that came out of that, and a lot of it was because they had been repeatedly dismissed and sent home, or been had a horrible time in A&E, and you know and sent home. So they were hanging on at home, sort of for forever, with the pain gradually getting worse and worse and worse and worse, and then eventually sort of pressing the button at 2 o'clock on a Saturday morning and being brought in screaming the place down because they'd been hanging on at home for ages. That was a real practical example of that whole vicious circle thing. Yeah.
And what was the diagnosis? I mean, what was when they eventually got to see somebody?
Um, yeah, I mean, it was they all had background of lots of stress essentially.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so, but just as a quick aside, there's a hand gone up, so I'll stop talking in a second. But as a quick aside, most of them had their appendices removed. And when we got the notes out to have a look, the notes typically said, "Oh, appendix normal, but removed just in case."
Yeah, perfectly normal. Oh,
Yeah,
God.
horrendous.
Oh, yeah, no,
Um,
fascinating, isn't it? Is
there's a
that you,
hand up.
Jens? Is that you, Jens? You've got Marley Williams Foal on your label.
Yes, yes, that's Mali. She has hijacked my account.
Oh my God, that's no. Anyway, what would you like to say?
I mean, that's so commonplace. What you say, Patrick, both your observations from A&E, and I see that every week. day in, day out with young women and pelvic pain. Abuse is not far away, lots of
Mm,
stress, different explanation models. Maybe there's IBD somewhere, referred to different places. Chaos, then going to a different place, studying maybe, or to college. It is so, so difficult. That's only an observation. My question to you is, when it comes to explaining pain or negotiating meanings of pain,
mm,
I think that's really, really difficult. It's so rewarding, and you have the benefit of being in a probably secured position down the line with referrals, etc. But people like Jonathan and I have to do it as on the front line and convincing people. And it's often very, very difficult when they want to get somewhere and you know for sure that's the end of the rainbow. You will be fobbed off by somebody else, and somebody else will say, "Oh, it's overgrowing intestinal bacterial growth," or "No,
mm,
it's an ovarian cyst." And you think, well, no, all the background is pointing towards this is not a biomedical answer.
mm,
It is
mm.
not, maybe it is endometriosis, but even with endometriosis, it's difficult because there might be endometrial tissue, might be not, and people go very long
Yeah,
down the
yeah.
avenue, even to get a hysterectomy eventually, and then of course um, the pain is still there. I
Uh,
find it extremely
It,
frustrating,
yeah.
extremely.
It's probably no different to uh, intervertebral discs. You know, you've got bulging discs, may or may not be. You know, we know that hundreds of people have them without pain,
Yeah.
and then for some people it seems to be the issue. So yeah, no, absolutely. Quick answer because I know there's other hands gone up. I, it is difficult, but I think it's about learning how to maybe contract with people. About we often call it changing the agenda. And again, I appreciate sitting at the end of the line in the pain clinic is maybe a privileged position, but quite often in pain clinics we have people who really don't feel they're at the end of the line. They still feel they're in the middle of kind of needing investigations and so on and so forth. And what I always used to do with people was to first of all give them a different story. So the slide I flagged up earlier on from Live Well with Pain, I worked for a long time to work out how to tell the story of pain in a different way, of it being a top down and rather than a bottom up, in a way that people would sort of listen. And then it's about contracting with them to say, look, okay, you know, can we agree we're going to work with this for a couple of sessions or something? Introduce them to something that we know will help. So the kind of thing I would do straight away after that was introduce them to some relaxation type stuff. And when they start to feel physically different, because again, you can do that fairly rapidly, people will then start listening and come on board with you. So there's a whole kind of sequence of things to be done there, um, uh, which can really help. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, uh, but I think you can do that. Yeah. Should we get someone else to
Yeah, Jonathan,
come in?
up next. Where are you?
Jens sort of um
Oh,
stole my question or thought my thoughts
outrageous.
for me. Which is, yeah, by the time you walk through a door with psychologist written on the top,
Yeah.
you've already accepted at least to a reasonable degree that you're
Oh,
prepared to entertain a psychological approach. And of course you sit with the both the sign saying pain is not all in your brain, but of course it is all about a failure of
yeah,
top-down inhibition. So
yeah,
actually it is and it isn't.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah. The
and
best. Can I just?
my experience just briefly, and
Go
I
on.
mean I'm still interested in how to help me deal with it is that I have about 740 patients with chronic pain at my practice. And I know because I've counted, and I know that about 90% of them, at least from my personal knowledge or in their notes, have experienced significant adverse childhood experience or intimate partner violence. And every year, dozens of them go back to Turkey and get MRI scans, because it's part of what they do there. And they come back and say, here, it's all in my spine, or they get ultrasounds or have pelvic examinations and say, here, here's the reason. And you know full well the misery of their lives and experiences. And so as a GP, there's a constant kind of often fraught attempt to provide validation without succumbing to the simple kind of explanation of a thing on a scan, because that often gets in the way of good treatment. On the other hand, a solution to their, an effective answer to their trauma is a lifetime of healing, where potentially a little nip and a tuck or a bit of laser could zap away the thing that they're most worried about. And the latest damage, since back surgery is no longer what it used to be, and bariatric surgery, thank God, is no longer what it used to be. My clinic is full of people who've had gallbladders removed, who've got chronic diarrhea as an after effect, and no relief to their pain.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not going to respond straight away. There's a load of things I could talk about. Thanks, Jonathan, for that. Maybe we get a few more questions and then
Okay.
Is that all right?
Okay, yeah. Okay,
Just conscious
then Mark.
that there are hands up. Yeah.
Yeah, Mark's up next.
Hi, Patrick.
Hi, Mark.
Yeah, so I found that absolutely fascinating, and sort of chimes in with a lot of my experiences and thoughts as well. I was sort of, I wonder whether you are, I'm guessing you are, but I won't put words in your mouth. Sort of inclined to sort of broaden this, so it's, what does this tell us about society? And obviously, we focused on the impact on women, and that's you make a very compelling case for that, which I find very convincing. But would you sort of broaden that to other areas of sort of maybe inequality and deprivation and the sort of stresses of a life, living in poor housing conditions with insecure employment, low wages, inadequate nutrition, all of those sorts of factors. And I mean, as you were talking, as you made the comparison between Alabama and Connecticut, I was reminded of a book I read quite recently, which you may be aware of, called The Spirit Level by Wilkinson and Pickett, which is sort of looks at, basically it charts pretty much every negative social or positive social indicator or index that you can think of against inequality, and finds that there's almost a one-to-one, and this is backed up, that they say by repeated international sort of trials, and all the evidence indicates that. So it's sort of like it's essentially another facet of this sort of broader social problem. And just one other quick point, I sort of second point in a way, is I was very interested by the way the personality traits you describe, which I sort of pretty much identified 100% with, in terms of the perfectionism, etc. And I mean, it's a bit of an cheeky extra question, but how that precisely correlates to this idea of some sort of underlying trauma or stress. But how do you get those traits from that, or what are the thoughts about that?
Yeah, I'm tempted to answer that, so I don't forget, because it's a really good question. I'll just give a brief answer, and then we'll let some other people come in. And again, I want to kind of come back to the points Jonathan was raising as well. So first of all, yes, absolutely. I've angled this towards women, but the model is universal. And I think if you look at deprivation across the board, it's in the context of the mechanism I was suggesting, all those things are likely to have an effect and reduce people's resilience, and therefore make them vulnerable. So yeah, absolutely. As I say, I would just kind of taking a particular slant on it. The second thing is that those traits, that's the other point you raised, are they result in particular behaviors. So the all or nothing behavior is the kind of thing to so the perfectionism and so on makes people push all the time, and so that straight away people, if you've got a sprained ankle and you can't rest because you believe you're going to lose your job and so on and so forth, you push, it's going to become a chronic problem kind of thing. I mean, it's a very simplistic, but there are behaviors that result from those traits that are unhelpful. If that's all right, as a quick answer. Yeah.
Okay.
And so actually, how does that relate to trauma? Well, actually, sorry, I didn't answer that clearly. So if, for example, using the power threat meaning framework idea, if you've had a childhood where parents have said to you, oh, effectively, you're not lovable unless you work really hard at school. That's the kind of, that could be the seeds for the all or nothing behavior that then goes on through, it's that kind of link. So it's not necessarily trauma, but it can be a sort of abuse of power in that way, where you've been held to ransom over relationships, for example.
Great, thank you.
Is that all right? Okay. I think David was next.
Yeah,
David Pike.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, David.
Hi,
Nice to
Patrick.
see you.
Nice to see you. I've got a lot of questions, but I shall try and be brief. Really, I've been investigating because I'm a clinical psychologist working with chronic pain as well, and I have done for many decades. But I'm interested in the process of catastrophization, which is also linked to perfectionism, where there's a chain of meaning. You start with, oh my God, I've got something wrong with me, and oh my God, it's a tumor, and it always ends up down the line with death. Or fear of death, either to yourself or someone else, which is, of course, what lies at the heart of PTSD. So there's that personal meaning of it meaning death. So it's really serious, but often the emotions that are involved in it from early childhood are so extreme they can't be expressed easily. There's a barrier holding them back. So you can't talk about them. And if you do, you use coded language. And if the physician or the practitioner hasn't got access to the codes they're using and doesn't understand their language, and also including the verbal, most people in pain clinics don't scream and shout. I mean, whereas in A&E they may well do. So it's learning to see that it's an expression of distress, but not in the way that we know it.
Thank you.
Comment on those.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, and I think I'm just thinking actually of the points that Jens and Jonathan were raising about kind of how do you get someone to that place where they, because ultimately what we're saying is, you need to sit down and talk it through, work out what the causes of your distress, your behavior, all that's all about. Now, the point Jonathan was making was you've got to want to sit in front of a psychologist or someone like us and want to do that. And that's tricky. And I think that journey of getting someone to the place where they need to be to start talking about these issues that we're talking about now, it is often a series of steps. And so one of the things I didn't mention today, but is a thing I often talk about, is the rule of 7, which some of you may know. So this comes from advertising, and it's a thing that's been around in advertising since the 1930s. Where they came up with this idea, and it kind of holds a bit of truth, I think, that if you've got a new product, you need to get it in front of your customer 7 times before they say, oh, there's a new washing powder. In other words, the first 6 times, it kind of probably bounces off, but then you start to notice it. And so that's why you kind of get bombarded with seeing the same things constantly, is because it takes a while to go in. Now, I've found that really helpful because um, when we think about people with chronic pain, um, when I used to run pain management programs, week 2 or week 3 of a program, a little hand would sort of go up at the back, and someone would say, "So you telling me this pain isn't going to go away?" And I was always astonished by that because we'd spend the whole of the previous weeks talking about chronic pain and why it wasn't going to go away. I know, again, echoing some points that were made earlier, they'll have seen a pain doctor and probably a physio and probably an orthopedic surgeon and a GP. So in other words, they've had the conversation multiple times already. And the rule of seven is quite helpful there because I think it tells us, because in the NHS, or in health generally, we generally have this kind of, "I told you once," this kind of one hit sort of idea. Haven't you got it yet? And it's not that people are stupid. It's that it's a really difficult message, as we know. And if we think that it takes 7 hits before someone's going to notice a new brand of washing powder, you know, that means that probably there need to be 8, 9, 10 conversations before the person's going to say, "Oh, okay, so you're saying this isn't just because of the bulging disc that I got on my MRI in Turkey. There's other things involved." So that was one of the points I wanted to make, which is that I think there are multiple steps, and I think particularly for GPs, often, all you can do in the 10 minutes that you've got is actually complete another step, but you're not going to land it in that time. It's going to take several go arounds. I think one of the things that's important is consistency, and of course that's why people go to Turkey, is because they get different kind of messages. But if systems can give people a consistent message, it will help them to get to the point where they can start to think, "Oh, hang on a minute, then maybe there's other things involved. Oh, maybe stress is important," rather than the initial response, which is, bloody psychologist, what are you going to do? Which is something we've all had to deal with over the years. So thank you,
Okay,
David.
thank you.
Yeah, can we?
Shane, I think.
Shane was next, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick, for the talk this evening. I've got just one quick question. I work in a community pain service, and we're fortunate to have an IAP service that's officially just starting to treat complex trauma, which is quite useful and very remarkable. So we're trying to make a good, firm connection with them because complex trauma and chronic pain obviously go together an awful lot. We also we're also in the process of making links with our 2 psych liaison services in our local general hospitals. So again, because there's so many people who unfortunately go to A&E looking for solutions and answers with chronic pain, and we're kind of hoping that if we were to have a presence of some kind in the A&E departments, and the psych liaison teams are wanting us to be there more. We're not at the moment, but we're looking to be. We would help with the high impact users, as they're called. And again, with a link with the complex trauma service, we're hoping that we'd be able to link between all 3 services, us, A&Es, and IAPT. Quick question is, do you know of any other pain team services that I've linked with, or do you know of any work that have linked with A&Es by any chance? It's like liaisons. Has that been tried or done? In what ways? Any?
Well, okay. Yes, it has. It's been tried in various ways over the years. I think in Birmingham particularly, there was the whole, I've forgotten the acronym now, initiative where they had liaison psychs in general hospitals, trying to do this kind of joined up work. So yes, essentially.
Good. All right, thank you.
The problem, and again, thank you for your points and your question. The problem, I think, is that often you've got different stories, and I'm going to use the word story in a very careful way going on. So you've got, if you've got sort of liaison psychiatry telling one story, in other words, "Oh, this is a, sort of depression or something," and then someone else saying, "Oh, this is complex trauma," and someone else saying, "Oh, well, this is chronic pain from, because you've got bulging discs." Often patients in that situation, because they're complicated, have got multiple stories, and what you hear from patients is them saying, "I go to a different person and I get a different story each time." I think what's really important is a story that makes sense to them, first of all, but that actually pulls it all together. So because one of the risks is that people then start to feel overwhelmed. In other words, that because what the kind of diagnostic medical approach tends to do is say, oh, well, you've got this, and this, and this, this. So people feel like they've got a sort of whole stack of different problems. And because of the sort of the fragmenting reductionist approach, you know what I mean? It actually just suddenly feels like they've got 10 problems rather than one problem. When the rest of us saying, well, no, actually, this is all joined up. The problem is often no one sits down with them and says, can we just talk about how this all fits together? And so one of the things that in that situation that I've always found really useful, and I just want to pass it on, are things like the pain cycle in the pain toolkit. I don't know if you've come across that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Where you can sit down with someone and say, look, okay, sort of, sleep, stress, fitness, weight, you can get it all on the table together, and you can start to draw a vicious circle. Now, when you do that, most people say, oh yeah, tell me about it. They know it, but no one's actually
on paper made it tangible.
It's really clear, yeah. And I think that's probably the most helpful thing, because then you can, my argument is once people have got a clear model themselves, they can then start asking the different professionals that want to help them for the right kind of help.
Sure.
Otherwise, what happens is they turn up in each place and say, help me. And we all go, oh, it's terribly complicated. And you know what I mean? It doesn't untangle. So
okay. All right. Thank you. It's really helpful.
Okay, thanks. Betsan, I think you were next.
Hi, Patrick. I wanted to go back to your comments about the abdominal pain. I had a very unpleasant experience recently when I had to go into A&E with our daughter who had quite extreme abdominal pain. And she'd been sent in by a female GP who was pretty convinced she had appendicitis. And she'd rung ahead to say she's too unwell to sit in A&E. 7 hours later, we were still sitting in A&E. And she was seen 4 o'clock in the morning by a male consultant who came in and said, I've seen your bloods and you haven't got appendicitis, you've got pancreatitis. And we're going to discharge you and bring you back in for an ultrasound because it's most likely you've got gallstones. And I had to stay with her because she was too unwell to stand up for herself. And it's only because I said, look, this doesn't really fit with her. She's a personal trainer, she's a nutritionist, she's fit, she's 36 years old, she's got a very good diet. She got no pain over her pancreas. The pains are all down over that right-hand side. And it doesn't fit. And he just would not listen. And fortunately, they kept her in that night. And the next morning, she was seen by a female consultant who said, I'm going to listen to your story. And I'm going to give you a CT scan just to check. And sure enough, CT scan showed appendicitis and no sign of pancreatitis at all. And the question is really, has there any work been done to show that perhaps women are dismissed more by male clinicians than they are by female ones? And maybe are the pressures in A&E playing into this as well? Because they just wanted to get rid of her. She was another female who'd come in with abdominal pain, and they just wanted to get rid of hers.
Yeah. Probably. I mean, I have a look at the survey, which is available online, the 2021 survey, and the special edition of the Lancet, because there's probably stuff in there. I don't know, but I suspect that there will be some stuff in there. Yeah.
I mean, they were having an argument at the bottom of her bed because even when they saw it as appendicitis, he still wanted to send her home with antibiotics. And the female consultant was saying, well, she's going to be in very soon again. And if I hadn't been there to stand up for her, she would have been sent home.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry you've been through that, but yeah, that's not untypical. And as I say, the sample we sort of looked at in Bath had been through exactly that kind of process, and got more and more distressed. And so what was actually happening was that they were very the script amongst the health professionals was, oh, they love coming in here and to get morphine and stuff. And actually, when you talk to the women, they all said, oh, they hated going in there because they were always treated kind of a bit like that.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, another woman with abdominal pain. Yeah. And but they were really distressed by the time they got in because they didn't want to go in. And of course, it's really difficult to then have a sort of sensible, assertive conversation when you're bouncing off the walls with pain.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that. Okay.
Jens, I think.
Yes. After 20 years or more in pastoral primary care, I'm very skeptical about the concept of closure. It sounds like if you want to be a Winston Churchill biographer and you want to have the ultimate answer to Winston Churchill's life, which answers all the questions because you found it that he's a narcissist or whatever. And I found myself also being wrong
Yeah.
for that woman, where I said, yes, it's your trauma and murder and all the usual suspects and your right flank pain. Oh, yeah, it's a manifestation of your trauma. But eventually, I didn't check her renal function. It happened. And there was also a renal stone, plus the trauma and everything else. I would say I know her very well and I trust her and she trusts me and she comes back, but never ever the increased understanding has kind of shut this all down, that she doesn't come back, that she doesn't feel existentially distressed. It's carrying on. Maybe I feel less distressed when she's coming and I dumped my emotional countertransference down. But I'm really skeptical about one diagnosis, one story, closure, and please, now you have learned about it, accept it, and don't you ever come back again.
Yeah.
Of
No,
course, she
and
will come back again. And of course, she will have questions. Are you really sure it's this descending inhibition control that is not working? Somebody else said, diddle, 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 and I can't carry on, and this and that, because the stresses of life are carrying on. And
yeah,
if
no,
pain is like hunger and thirst, of course, she will come back and back and back.
yeah. No,
It's my problem. I have to be relaxed that I'm not a dog for Christmas closure. I'm a dog for life.
yeah. No, I agree with you, Jens. I think we should always be very skeptical of a sort of single answer solution. I agree with you completely, but I think if we when I talked about changing the agenda earlier on, what I was referring to was this idea that rather than hunting for the thing, whether it's a gallstone or a childhood trauma, I think that's the wrong way to do it. It's not about that. What I was trying to talk about with formulation is the idea that we say, look, okay, let's try and get all the different elements on the table and have a look. So, you may well have this, that, and the other that's showing up on the scan. But actually, let's look at, your sleep. Let's look at how stressed you are. Let's look at how fit you are, and put it all together. Because I think if people get the idea that all of these different things all have a part to play, in other words, you may have some physical abnormality going on, but actually, if you're not sleeping and you're completely stressed and overweight and blah blah blah, it's all going to be much worse. So it's getting to that. That's what I mean by changing the agenda. So it's moving from a biomedical to more of a biopsychosocial concept of the whole thing. Because also I think it gives people some agency in terms of self-management as well. And otherwise, if we don't do that, well, they're going to keep coming back to the expert each time for an answer. So it's all bound up together.
I think
Can,
the agency
yeah,
needs to be coupled with, you can always come back to me. It's not
yes,
a dismissal. It's not a rejection. That's the whole issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay.
Mary, I think.
Yeah.
Just for context, Patrick, we've not met before, but I'm a systemic psychotherapist. So I've been thinking about this through the lens of relationships. And I took a photograph of one of your slides about the assumptions about if I'm to be acceptable myself, about high standards, being in control of emotions, don't complain, neglect own needs. And I was wondering how much of that applies to those of us on the screen and our colleagues, and how many of us have had adverse childhood experiences, which clearly we're not going to talk about here. But many of us could be in the same place as many of the chronic pain patients that we're talking about today.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what makes the difference between those of us who are on one side of the desk and those of us who are on the other. What is the resilience that makes you the professional as opposed to the patient? And because I think, knowing my colleagues as I do, and friends, many of those assumptions could apply to many of my colleagues, the high achievers, the drivers, and so on. And thinking about some of what's been said in the conversation so far, a lot of it seems to be about relational trauma. And a lot of what drives people, as you said, Jens, you can always come back to me if you need me, that the repair and the resilience is really about solidifying relationships and giving people confidence in relationships, or confidence they can feel that concern either from a doctor if they didn't get it from a parent or a partner, and so on. So I don't have any nice tidy conclusion to this, but I was just thinking about what makes the difference between us and them, if we want to look at it that way, and some of the shared assumptions and drivers that we have that make some of us resilient and some of us chronic pain.
I mean, that's why I came up with the model, the mechanism model, because I was trying to wrestle with exactly that point, and saying, well, because we know, don't we, if you've got a good stable job, you work in public sector, so you can get 6 months off and 6 months half pay, as opposed to being self-employed. You've got a good relationship and a family. We know that all those things help. We know that the absence of those things tends to tip people into more vulnerability. So it was wrestling with exactly those issues. And I think, and if you look at other literature, those sort of cushions, if you like, are spelt out in other ways, aren't they? So and hence the argument that actually, women are on the back foot to begin with because of all the structural stuff that they have to deal with, which men don't. So again, is it any wonder perhaps that more women fall off, that all the balance falls off, if you like, than men? Because actually, there's a whole load of stuff around. The other point is that actually, the issues that have been highlighted in the Sarawi model, things like the all or nothing behavior, the perfectionism, and so on. One of the big problems with those is that they're kind of socially desirable.
Yes.
So that they're not pathologies. I mean, we're talking about them in the terms of pathology, but that's not, people having panic attacks. It's about socially desirable stuff. I mean, if you go right back, to the onset of the ME fatigue thing, when people talked about yuppie flu, it was it suddenly all made sense to me. Yeah, well, absolutely. There are people who are overdriving, themselves, and their bodies saying, no, we're not doing this anymore. Yeah. So thank you. But I mean, I think it's in there. Have a look at the mechanism thing. But I should say as well, the paper that this came from was published in the British Journal of Pain. The green thing, if you're members of the Pain Society, you'll get that in 2018, 2019.
So is the ultimate implication then that we go for prevention? We look at, early parenting stuff, breastfeeding, bonding, having fathers in the delivery room, those really early kind of stuff. I mean, it seems quite a long way from
I guess it is, but
chronic pain.
I guess it is, but exactly how we ever going to do that? I mean, it means we shouldn't stop doing that stuff, but yeah. No, I think it's about, I think I go back to what I said earlier on, which is that I think it's about actually finding a way of having the conversations with people that moves them from the, oh my God, I need another scan, there's something wrong, to a different model, which allows us to then have these conversations to say, might stress be part of this? Tell me a bit about what's happened to you. And that's the stuff we can all learn to do, I think. To have the right conversations with people when they're presenting. It's probably more achievable. Yeah. Thank you. I'm conscious of other people. But is that right? Can I go back to Jonathan, because I'm conscious that he raised a load of things, and I'm not sure I addressed them, although we've talked about some of them.
Oh, sorry,
Jonathan. Yeah.
I just want to be very quick because I want other people to ask questions. The title of your talk is what chronic pain tells us about society. I was born in 71. Society is far less sexist than it was at any other time in my life, and yet rates of chronic pain have gone up. Medicine has far more women than it's ever had, and rates are going up. There's less sexism in medicine than there ever was. So I'd like you to answer the question you set yourself. Given all of that, why are the rates of chronic pain? What does chronic pain tell us about society and about medicine?
Thank you. Yeah, good points, well made. Well, I think, as I say, when I started to, because you're right, of course, but I think when we started to look at this sort of structural, what they call the sort of structural sexism in the institutions, that maybe hasn't. Well, it has changed, but not significantly. When we look at violence against women, that is still a real problem. I think maybe there are other forces at work that are combining to produce this. I mean, I think I would combine that with other things like perhaps medicalization of conditions that weren't before but are now. So people are kind of looking for more medical kind of explanations for things. So there's a whole range of forces going on there. But I think I suppose what I was thinking with the title was that it's maybe that it's and perhaps the medicalization thing is important as well, in the sense that it's a kind of a way of expressing a lot of the inequalities that are in society at the moment across the board. And maybe we should pay attention to that rather than drilling down all the time into the. I mean, we need to do that as well, but drilling down all the time into the biological, which seems to still end in dead ends. That's kind of where I'm coming from. Thank you for raising that. That's an interesting point.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anne, I think you want to speak.
Anne was next, I think. Yeah.
Just a couple of things. One is to say, Patrick, I'm just about to run 2 non-medical pain self-management courses, and all the people that have signed up are females, which very much goes with what you were saying, which is a shame, but I am going to work on that. The other thing is that do we have self-management of chronic pain too far down the line? Should self-management of chronic pain start in primary care and use not necessarily the GP because they don't have the time, but the health coaches to find to get out the story? So
the simple answer to that, and thank you, is yes, of course, but people have got to be ready to go down that road. And so I come back to the points I was making earlier on about the 7 times. People have got to have those conversations to get them to a point where they're ready to think about self-management. And that's the tricky bit, is that actually the system, in theory, absolutely, it's making sure it's getting people to a place where they're ready to engage with that earlier on. And from experience, a number of people are just not ready until they've been there for some time. So,
one of the things we've done some taster days for pain cafes, and at every single one of them, I can assure you that we have a number of people that actually break down sobbing at the fact that suddenly, they've been through pain management courses through the same management team, but the fact that there are people who are prepared to believe them unconditionally and without judgment, and to offer them something, some support, ongoing support, not just a course and then it's ended, but that sort of ongoing support. And I'm passionate about this. I bore myself to tears with it, but it is because we've seen it work so much, and particularly this taking the self-management out to the community, into where it's needed, rather.
And we should be doing that. I agree with you, but I'm just saying that the problem is if you catch people too early in their journey, if you like, a lot of people are just not ready to embrace it. But of course it should be out there. It shouldn't be stuck in the back end of a pain clinic, at the back end of secondary care. No, thank you. Can we? Thanks, Anne. Can we
Peter?
Move to Peter?
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to raise this topic earlier, but somebody else preempted me about the effects of socioeconomic factors and whether they disproportionately impact on women. But one quick question I have is that a long time ago now, when we first started these seminars, somebody gave a presentation. I'm trying to remember his name. It's his GP. His first name's James. But he gave a presentation showing that there was a close about the correlation between areas of high poverty and inequality and deprivation and so on, and chronic pain. But the third thing he showed was areas of high quality, not only chronic pain, but also abuse of the drugs used to treat it, possibly iatrogenic abuse. And I was wondering whether whether there was any information about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure there is. I noticed someone had posted in the chat about an article called "The Sociology of Chronic Pain," and that's kind of where to look for those kind of issues. I mean, it's yes, absolutely. There's plenty of work out there that shows the socioeconomic correlates and deprivation correlates for all kinds of long-term conditions. I can't put my hand on it immediately, but yes, it's a simple answer. Yeah, thanks, Peter. I think Ernie was, yeah.
Okay, I think I had to turn off my mute. I've published a lot on these issues, the correlation between is it job loss and abuse and chronic pain, and it's become very popular in the States. I'm talking to you from Seattle, Washington. Case in Deaton and the deaths of despair, but there's articles in JAMA showing where auto plants closed down in Detroit. You're going to get more chronic pain. So there is a link, and they're complex. My point is, having published on this a lot, and some in good places and some not good places, because the biomedical journals such as Pain tend not to take it. They have taken some of my articles, but if they rejected, then I published something in the Yale's Journal of Biology and Medicine about many of these issues, particularly about abuse, spouse abuse, child abuse and pain, and loss of job and pain. It hasn't been picked up. And I know that from citations. It's not cited. My stuff is not cited. And I think that points to a larger issue is that the incentive is all biomedicalized. The incentive in it now is to look at in pain clinics, they do biomedical interventions. That's what gets reimbursed. And patients want a biomedical diagnosis, as you indicated. And I think that the problem is, and not only Turkish patients, but here in the US as well. And in China, by the way, I do a lot of work in China. They're doing more and more blocks. They see patients for about 5 or 10 minutes in China. This is a big deal because China's a lot of the world's population. And so the upshot is, I think we're preaching to the converted. We all listening here agree with you. But I think that the medical model does not, and it's pervasive. It's number one. It sits at the top of the hierarchy. That's what patients want, doctors want. They have the highest prestige. And I feel frustrated at this point in my career, and I'm nearing its end. I just don't think we've made any impact.
No, thanks for that, Annie. Yeah, no, I mean, I feel the same frustration. The reason I put Gabor Mate on the end of my presentation was just that I think the impact he's having, he's saying the same things, but the impact he seems to be having is interesting because people seem to be listening to him. Maybe not the right people, but he's
well, I don't know in the UK, but again, the whole incentive in terms of, so I was in a department of anesthesiology for most of my career, and the people that had incentive were the ones who did procedures for pain.
Yeah. It's the same in the UK. It's the same in the UK.
Or else who did research on mice.
Yeah.
And I was very low in the hierarchy throughout my career. And I just think that it's the systemic problem of everything being medicalized.
Yeah.
That's the problem that we're facing.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. It's the same problem in the UK. The interventionists in pain clinics are the people who earn the money, usually for a wider surgical specialty. So they're often attached to intensive care and so on. And it's the only part of the specialty that earns any money. So it's the same problem. Yeah. No, it is. But as we know, that leaves a whole load of people with chronic pain wandering around out there who are not getting the right help. And then, of course, you tip into the opioid problem, which is coming here, which you've had to deal with in the States as well. So yeah, no, I agree. But it's just I think it's trying to offer, how do we shift that? And as I say, the thing I referred to a couple of times is this whole idea of you have to present a different model, a different story particularly to patients, I think, to get them to make different choices. And the thing that I worked really hard on for 5 to 10 years probably is learning how to do that, learning how to talk about a top-down pain system in a way that is accessible so that people are going, oh, okay, maybe there's a different way of looking at this. And then they start to ask different questions and go in a different direction. And I think that's really important because that's the thing we can do in the face of this, because that other stuff's not going to go away. So
by the way, I hadn't heard what was that advertising principle? I looked it up on the web.
The rule of 7.
The rule of 7. I think that's brilliant. We should bring that into pain more. But again, these patients, they have 15 minutes with a doc.
Yeah.
It's usually in the US, it's often probably usually an anesthesiologist. Then they get put in. And how do you find out if someone's been a victim of abuse or?
Well, again, I think that's down the line. That's you can't unpack that story in a 15-minute consultation.
Yeah, sure.
It's not going to happen. But what you can do is move them along the line. The rule of 7 thing. You can move them along the line a bit to say, maybe there are other things at play here that I need to be thinking about. That's what I'm suggesting, if that makes sense. Yeah. You need people who are skilled to do that, and it's not going to happen in a 15-minute medical clinic. No. Yeah.
I was going to say 15 minutes an absolute luxury. It's 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay. When
You're
I
still not going to
started
do it
in
in
my
15
practice,
minutes.
it was 7.5 minutes, 2 every 15 minutes. Anyway, briefly, a couple of things I'd like to say. There's a very interesting psychologist, Steve Biddulph. I mean, he's an Australian guy who wrote Raising Babies, and he talks about resilience. And his theme was that if the child can be given 3 years of warmth from somewhere or other within his team of people looking after him, then that he or she will be resilient to a whole lot of other hits and mishaps through life. And he got into big trouble because he said no child should be sent into a childcare facility before the age of 3. And all these feminists came down on his head like a ton of bricks. But he said, well, it looks like that's what it is, that if we send children out, and of course, we're wondering, why is there more chronic pain going on? Well, maybe it's because we're making women work rather than stay home. Now, I know that's highly controversial, but, the natural biological state of a child and a mother is to be together for the first couple of years. And
Can I just interrupt there, Maureen? Because actually the evidence is just bonding with someone. It doesn't have
yes,
to
no,
be
I'm
with
not
the
saying
mother.
with the mother, and I'm not saying it's
So,
got to be with somebody. It doesn't have
yeah,
to be with the mother. But
it's a,
clearly, we stick mothers on their own with the baby in Britain. But in my Bangladeshi patients, it was the mother and the granny and the auntie and the sister who all shared the care of the child. But anyway,
yeah.
it was all about the first few years of that child's life has to be with a warmth and a cultural caring, la la la. And I wonder whether we're going down a funny track where we're pressurizing young women to go back to work, and it's almost regarded as quite eccentric to want to not to do that.
It's tricky, isn't it? Because of course that links us into things like economics and young people wanting to buy their own home and the
Of
cost
course,
of living and so on. So yeah, absolutely. So
in the
I think
1950s, one man's income would support a family of 5 and the mother wouldn't go out to work. Whether that
yeah,
was the ideal or not, I don't know. But,
yeah.
anyway, we're sending children into childcare facilities, which may not be very skillful, and will leave the child crying for hours on end. And then the mother comes and picks her up, or the granny or the mother or the father, and so, oh, yeah, it's been fine all day. But these children are left and they become tolerant of neglect. And that internalizes into traumatic early experiences. So I think
Yeah,
we have to be
yeah.
very careful about our our politics and the way we advocate early life. And the Sure Start thing went brilliantly until the Tories got rid of it.
Yeah.
And that was another big project that
Yeah.
was extremely good for.
No, I agree, and I think Sure Start going was a terrible thing. But I would come back to the point that I think we are where we are, and I think
Yeah.
that one of the things that's really important, I think, just reflecting on some of the conversations we've had this evening, I'm going to repeat the point, is that it's about getting people to shift their model, their understanding about their health, about their pain, because that's what we're talking about, to allowing the fact that things like, their upbringing, and so on and so forth might be relevant, because the point is, if they don't, if they see it's just a medical problem, as was kind of being talked about earlier on, they're never going to actually seek the right kind of help to unravel what might be going on, and going to stay stuck in this awful, as we know, this awful kind of no man's land where they're just constantly requesting tests that don't show anything.
Yep.
So
I agree.
it's helping people to get to that point where they can start to, as I say, embrace a biopsychosocial
But that's
model.
down the track. What I'm
Yeah.
saying is the early experience may lay them more vulnerable to.
You're probably right.
I don't know.
You're probably right. But
David.
it's what do we do? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Just some quick points. I think chronic pain, as a very quick and dirty explanation of it, is they've got a broken heart. Someone broke their heart, or they were perceived to have broken their heart. So if a little girl and her daddy shouts at her, it breaks her heart. Now, if that goes on and she's got no control over it and cannot defend herself, then it becomes just internalized as something she can't do anything about, and she can't tell anyone because she also loves her dad. So, she's got that conflict,
That's where that's where the power threat meaning framework, I think, is a helpful framework, because it helps us to see. So what happens in between that turns that into chronic pain? If we follow that through, and I think a framework like that helps us to see, well, okay, so she experienced, a kind of abuse of power in a relational thing. Therefore, she will have adopted certain coping strategies to deal with that.
Yeah.
Therefore, is that what's going on now? Maybe she needs to find a different way of dealing with rejection.
Yes.
So we need a framework and models. I'm a big fan of those. Because otherwise, I mean, these ideas are all right, but it's like, how do you grapple with them? Because otherwise, it gets really messy, doesn't it? And sometimes it's difficult to feel your way, especially where there's a lot of stuff that people present with, which they do.
Yeah, in the EMDR terms, it's a stop signal. All pain is a stop signal, but it's finding out what it is that the person has to stop.
And why?
And why?
Why is it telling you to stop?
Thank you.
Betsan.
I think one of the issues that I see is that we can give people this understanding, but the services just aren't there to help them to deal with it. A lot of the people that I see are women who carry a lot of life loads, things that I call life loads, that they can't do anything about. Because they're external life loads. They may be looking after, parents with dementia, can't afford childcare, trying to hold down a job, trying to pay a mortgage. These aren't things that they can actually directly do anything about. And also that, if they have had a lot of childhood trauma, there just aren't the services there to help because that's a long-term issue to sort. And the services just aren't there. So we've got lots of people, even if we give them this insight, what do we do about it?
Well, I think that's a very good point. And I think there's a brilliant paper, and I can't remember the authors, but if you Google it, you can find it. It's called Beck Never Lived in Birmingham. And it's a critique of CBT. And of course, CBT is probably the most accessible form of psychological help that's out there. But he makes the point that it was developed for people who essentially their lives are okay, but their thoughts are very negative about things, and it's about correcting the thoughts, but actually against a backdrop of support and essentially a life that's going well. So if people have got a lot of stuff going on, CBT is not the answer. So correcting their thoughts, which is what CBT is all about, isn't going to help. I mean, I just mentioned that because that's the kind of route people get pushed down very often, because that's what's available. So you're right, Betsan. I mean, I think there isn't necessarily this stuff there. The argument I've always made with this is because years and years ago, when I started out, I thought, well, the answer is we're going to get out and educate everybody about chronic pain and how to help it and so on, and we'll put on all sorts of workshops and training and so on for health professionals, and realized that it just wasn't working. And so I sort of switched my thinking to thinking, well, actually, maybe it's about empowering people. So maybe the thing we need to be thinking about, and I'm just thinking about what you were saying, is that, what can we all do to empower people in that kind of situation to start taking back a bit of control? And it could be quite small things, maybe things that are seemingly unconnected with their pain. But we know that if you improve people's sense of self-efficacy or self-control, or their locus of control, you shift that helps. In terms of the internal psychological mechanisms, it's a really important thing. And so maybe there are lots of things we can't do something about, but I think working on empowering, giving people agency is never a waste of time. And sometimes, it might mean doing something quite different, like for example, helping people to access a food bank, or sort of improving their access to a hot meal or something, because that improves their well-being, their sense of agency, and in turn is likely to be helpful for other stuff as well.
Yeah.
So it's thinking about those kind of things,
Okay.
because I would argue that it's all going to help.
Great. Okay, thank you, Patrick. I think we're running a little bit over now, but I don't know if anybody's got any urgent last moment thoughts or messages to put on the chat. Okay, lovely. Well, thank you very much, Patrick, and thank you to everybody who's taken part. It's been really interesting, and we've provoked lots of new ideas, and hopefully everybody's enjoyed it. So anyway, I just want Peter and Tim and Betsan to remain behind, but if everybody else can leave, not wanting to be too negative about you, you're all wonderful. So just go away, and we will have another couple of words before we finish the meeting. And I can
Maureen, that's not going to help what Patrick has just said about us taking a little bit more control and having a bit of self-efficacy and whatever.
Oh, all right. So just say bugger off doesn't work. Sorry.
No. Bye. Have a good time.
Yeah. Bye, everyone. Brilliant.